Join me in making this eyelet crystal bezeled ring. Take a look at the material description below and gather everything you need to get started to make this beautiful ring with a super comfy peyote stitch band. I'm going to begin with 40 Delicas that I've strung onto my thread. I have my stop bead here at the end, and I'm including that stop bead in my 40 count. So I have my stop bead plus an additional 39 beads. Take your thread and needle and take it back through your stop bead, so your first bead here. And as you pull it tight, you're going to have your thread and needle coming out that stop bead and your thread tail going the opposite direction. We're going to start by just making a simple little peyote bezel. So to do this, if you do not know peyote, I would recommend just checking out a flat stitch peyote, and that will give you a better idea of how to do it flat, and then you'll be ready to do it in the round like this for a bezel. So I'm coming out of my stop bead here. I'm going to pick up one Delica. I'm going to skip one bead and go through the next. And as I pull my thread, I want to pull my thread that I'm using here and my tail thread to make sure everything's nice and tight. And as I pull that, the new bead that I just added will be sitting directly next to one of the beads from that first row, that first group of 40 that I picked up. So I'm going to do this again. I'm going to pick up one bead, skip over a bead, and pass my needle through the next bead. And as I pull tight again, the bead that I'm adding will sit right next to the bead directly below it in the first group of 40 that I picked up. So I'm going to do this 20 times. I'm going to work in that peyote stitch until I get back to my stop bead here. And then once I get back to my stop bead, I'm going to step up and I'm going to start working with my 15-0 seed beads. For anyone who does not know how to step up, this is how you're going to step up to the next row before we start adding our 15-0s. I'm picking up my last Delica here, and I'm going to skip one bead and I'm going to go through the next. And so the next bead here that I'm going through will be my stop bead. And after you go through your stop bead, your thread and needle should be coming out between one bead, a single bead, and a pair of beads. We're going to take our thread, and the jumping up or the stepping up is going to simply just be going through one of those beads in the pair of two that's coming directly after a needle. So once you go through that bead, you will now be in position to work another row of peyote stitch. And you can see here that this peyote stitch little band here, I like to keep it on my finger, and that will help me keep it flat so that it's all facing the same direction. It's easy to get it twisted, so you want to try to keep it on your finger as you work with it, just to avoid it twisting. The next row of peyote stitch that we're going to do is using our 15-0 seed beads. So I'm going to pour just a little pile of those out because we're not going to need a lot right now. And I'm going to continue with my peyote stitch, adding my 15-0s instead of my Delicas. So for this round here, this row, we're going to pick up one 15-0 and we're going to skip over that single bead and through the top bead in that set of two directly after. So we're just picking up one 15-0 and going through the next bead that's sticking up above the rest. I have lots of other tutorials to show you how to do peyote stitch, so if you're unfamiliar with it, I definitely check those out and do something flat first. That's usually the easiest way to learn, and then once you're pretty confident with your flat peyote, go ahead and start picking up some beads, and you can start doing this in a bezel form. We're going to continue around here, and we're going to actually do 2 rows of peyote stitch with our 15 O's. After completing the 2 rows of peyote stitch here in the 15 O's, we're going to build up the back of the bezel. Coming out of whichever seed bead you're coming out of, as long as it is one of these seed beads that is the one here that's like sticking up here above the rest, you want to be in position to start another row of peyote, but we're not going to do another row of peyote. We're just going to make sure that our thread and needle are coming out of one of those beads that's on that very top row. We're going to pick up 5 seed beads, 5 of the 15 O's, 5 of those 15 O's, and let those fall down. And now what we're going to do is we're going to count over 4 of our seed beads that are sticking up. So I have 1, 2, 3, and then here is the 4th seed bead that is sticking up in that very top row. I'm going to go through that one bead. And I'm going to go back through my 5 seed beads. Back through all 5 of those seed beads. And it should pull the 2 sides of your bezel together. Go back through that first seed bead where you first picked up the 5. So we're going to go back through that seed bead. And I'm going to go back through the 5 seed beads one more time here. And give it a nice tight pull. And this span of 5 seed beads should now be pulling the sides of your bezel together. I'm going to go back through the seed bead. That's part of my peyote. And now I'm going to continue with the peyote stitch down the side of my bezel. Just as I would normally be, I'm going to pick up one of my seed beads and go through the next bead. And I'm going to continue this for until I've picked up 6 beads. So I have 2 beads, I need 4 more. This should be my 5th one here. And one more here, this is my 6th. So I'm going to pass through that last seed bead here. And we're going to repeat the same steps. I'm going to pick up 5 of my seed beads, 5 of my 11 O's, or my 15 O's. These are my 15 O's. Let those fall down. I'm going to skip 3 of my beads here that are sticking out, and I'm going to go through the 4th one. So I'm going to skip 1, 2, 3 and go through the 4th one that's sticking up. And pull that tight. Go back through the 5 seed beads. Pull tight. Back through my seed bead here on the other side. That's part of that peyote stitch. And back through the 5 seed beads again that are spanning across the back of my bezel. back through my seed bead here on the other side. That's part of the peyote stitch. And so now I should be coming out and in position to finish the peyote stitch on this side of the bezel. So I'm only doing another row of peyote stitch in between these two lines or two sections, two rows of 5 seed beads. That's the only place where I'm adding another row of peyote stitch. And I'm going to continue this until I get to the end here, and then I'm going to start working on the other side of the bezel. So go ahead and add those last few beads there to finish up that peyote stitch, and then we'll move on to the front of the bezel. Now we're going to move on to working on the front side of the bezel. Here I am still on the back side. I've just finished this back portion of the bezel, and I'm going to take my threaded needle and just follow my thread path and follow the beads to the front. So I'm going to pass through a 15-0, a Delica, and a couple more Delicas here just to get to the front side of the bezel. And just kind of play with this and squish this and get this sort of in the shape that we want. You want your thread to come out of that very top row, so you want your thread coming out of one of these beads that's sticking out above the rest. And we're going to take our seed bead. We're going to take our crystal and just lay it in there. So we want the colorful fun side facing up, and we want the back of the bezel facing downwards. Now I like to hold it together as I work with it, just to make sure that this stays in the right shape as I work. Now we're going to start continuing around and add another row of peyote with our 15-0s. As I said, I like to keep the stone here, the crystal, in place as I work this first row. You don't have to. You can put your crystal in after you get the first row done, but I find that it makes the bezel a little nicer, a little bit tighter, just keeps its shape better if I just hold it all together and work with it. So I'm going to continue here and do 2 rows of peyote stitch around just like I did on the other side, but this time I'm just going to have my crystal in place so that as I do those 2 rows of peyote stitch, it holds my crystal, and that will be the bezel part of my project here, the minimal bezel, just to hold that crystal in place. After completing 2 rows of peyote stitch, we're going to be back at the beginning here, ready to begin another row of peyote stitch, but instead of doing a peyote stitch, I'm going to do a right angle weave stitch. So I want my thread needle to be coming out of one of the beads here in the top row, just as if I were going to start peyote stitch, but we're going to do something a little bit different here. So with my threaded needle here, I'm going to pick up 3 beads, and I'm going to take these beads, I'm going to take my thread and needle and go back through the same bead where my thread is coming out. This will bring those 3 beads in a little circle here. And so now I've attached 3 beads to the outside of that 1 bead where my thread's coming out of. I'm going to continue here to the right and go through the next seed bead that I normally would pass through for peyote. So I'm passing through all of these beads in that top row. I'm going to pick up 2 seed beads, and then I'm going to use one of the beads on this set of 3 here where I started, and I'm going to go through that bead on the right, and then through the bead that's in the peyote stitch base here, and pull that tight, and continue on to the next bead in your peyote stitch. Pick up 2 seed beads, and now I'm going to share again that bead here all the way on the right in my last step. So I'm going to pass through that bead all the way on the right, and the bead in my peyote stitch again, all the time giving it a nice tight pull just to make sure that everything is nice and tight and I don't have any slack in my string. And move on to the next bead in the peyote stitch. And again here, I need 2 beads. And I'm going to pass through the bead from the previous stitch, or the previous little section here. Pass through the bead all the way on the right. And through the bead in my peyote stitch. So I'm going to do this is very much like a right angle weave, and I'm just going to continue to do this the whole way around until I get back to the beginning. It's not going to sit very flat, so don't be concerned about that at all. It'll be sitting up a little bit, so don't worry about that. We're going to take care of that once we get back to the beginning here. When you have 1 bead left in your peyote stitch, we're going to treat this one a little bit differently, and we're going to join our beginning and our end together. Go ahead and pass through that 1 bead in the peyote stitch that you have left to do, and we're going to go up through the bead on the left, pick up 1 of our seed beads, and down through the bead on the right. This will complete that right angle weave without adding any additional beads that we don't need. I'm going to just reinforce this here by going through the bead in the peyote stitch, and then up my bead on the left, and I'm going to continue here, and I'm going to go through the bead that I just added in this step. So coming out of that bead that you just added in this step, that 1 single bead, you should now be coming out of the bead that is just like all these other beads around at the top here are going to be that 1 single center bead that's sticking out above everything else, and it's sticking out and it's forming a nice little oval here over our crystal. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our thread needle and we're going to pass through all of those beads that are the center bead in that group of 3, that's sitting above the peyote stitch bead. So you can see as I go along here, I'm just gathering all those beads together. I'm just going through each one of them. And pulling tightly as I go. These beads that we're passing through, the holes will all be aligned, and so it will be really easy to just kind of scoop through and pick them all up. Once you've gone through all of them, you can reinforce this if you'd like. This will be the top of your bezel, so we want to make sure that we get it nice and tight and reinforce it just so that we don't have anything break and everything looks nice and aligned. After reinforcing here all the along the top here, what I want to do is just take my threaded needle and bring it to a point where I can tie this thread off. Now you can, if you have plenty of thread left, you can continue to work with it, but to do the band on my ring, I'd like to start with a fresh piece of thread. So I'm going to take this thread needle and just follow my thread path here and take my thread to a point where I can easily tie it off, and then I'll be adding on a new piece of thread to do the band for my ring. So you can see here, I'm just going to take my thread and meet back up with that stop bead where I have my tail thread, and this is where I will tie this off and burn this down. And then once I do that, I'm going to come back here with a new piece of thread, and I'll do the band for the back of my ring. On the back side of my bezel, I'm going to start along the edge here with along the long edge here, and I'm going to use one of my 15-0 seed beads here to anchor my thread to start my peyote stitch bezel. So it depends on how wide of a band you want. I'm going to anchor my thread on this second seed bead here, the second seed bead in the top row of peyote, second seed bead here up from that row of 5. So I'm going to pass through that seed bead, and I'm just going to take my needle and thread through that seed bead again, just like I would with a stop bead, and that'll just anchor my thread. So I'm just using a bead in my project as a stop bead. And now I'm going to pick up some Delicas here and just work back and forth with a simple peyote stitch. I'm using that top row of 15-0s, that top row there in my peyote stitch. So I'm going to pick up 3 Delicas, and once I go through this last 15-0 seed bead here after my 3rd Delica, I'm going to turn it back around here, and this is just a flat peyote stitch, so nothing special about this. I'm just somewhat centering this flat peyote stitch on the back of the bezel here. And work it back and forth until you get it the length that you need to make the band fit around your finger. So you can see here, all I'm doing is working that peyote stitch off of the side of the bezel, utilizing the 15-0s here to begin that peyote stitch. So I'm going to keep going here, working on this peyote stitch, and I'll make this band the length that I need it to get around my finger, and then I will meet it back up with this side of my bezel and attach it there, and then my ring will be done. Once I'm done with my peyote strip, I'm going to match it up to the peyote on the other side of my bezel, and I'm going to pick up the beads that I need to use from the bezel peyote stitch here and use those to finish and attach my band here. So you can see here that I'm starting here with needing to add a bead. So I'm going to pick up one of the 15-0s here off of my bezel, pass through the peyote stitch on my band, so pass through my Delica, and pass through the next peyote stitch, the next bead on my bezel, through the next Delica, through the next 15-0, and I'll end by passing through that Delica. And so you can see here that I've added the peyote to this side in the same way that I started it on the other side, just going a little bit backwards there. I'm going to reinforce this just by going through those beads once more and passing through the 15-0s and the Delicas to get some extra thread running through those beads, because anytime you have a connection point like this, especially if you have something like a ring where it's going to be on your finger and you're going to be twisting it and it's going to get some wear and tear, you just want to make sure that all of those connection points are really well reinforced. So now that I've got my thread running back through there another time, I am ready to just take this extra thread, meet it up. If I can meet it up with this other one, I will. But all I have to do now is just tie off my thread ends, and then my ring will be ready to wear. I hope you enjoyed making this project as much as I did. If you're interested in more tutorials from us, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you're notified as soon as we put out new videos.